Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you inspiring tales of resilience, love, and transformation. Today, we share the story of Emma, a young woman who, after losing everything, chose to rebuild her life in the most unexpected way. From heartbreak to hope, Emma's journey is a testament to the power of honesty, courage, and self-discovery. As her past catches up with her, Emma must decide whether to reveal her true identity to the man she loves. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories to follow this incredible journey and more. Turn on notifications and join us today. Once upon a time in the bustling city of New York, there lived a young woman named Emma Anderson. She was the only child of Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, a couple whose lives revolved around building their legacy and raising their daughter with love and care. Her father, Thomas Anderson, was a renowned billionaire, the founder of Anderson Motors, a name that resonated with success and innovation. Her mother, Margaret, was the gentle soul behind the scenes, balancing the demanding world of business with the warmth of family life. Emma grew up in the lap of luxury, her life a tapestry of private schools, grand family dinners, and vacations that took her to the farthest corners of the globe. Yet, despite their wealth, the Andersons remained grounded, instilling in Emma values of kindness, humility, and resilience. She was a bright, spirited young woman with dreams of her own, studying business at an Ivy League university, ready to follow in her father's footsteps. But life has a way of shattering even the most idyllic of worlds. It was during her final year at university when tragedy struck. Emma's parents, on their way to a prestigious business conference in Chicago, were involved in a fatal car accident. The news rippled through her world like a thunderclap, leaving her life in ruins. One moment she was a daughter, a student, a young woman with endless possibilities. The next, she was an orphan with a vast fortune she had no idea how to handle. Emma spiraled into grief, her once vibrant spirit dimmed by the weight of her loss. Her uncles, sensing an opportunity, descended like vultures. They tried to lay claim to her inheritance, asserting that a mere woman had no right to the Anderson estate. Their actions were cloaked in the guise of familial concern, but Emma saw through their intentions. They sought to control her wealth and, by extension, her life. It was during this dark period that Emma met Kent, her father's longtime lawyer and confidant. Kent was a man of integrity, steadfast and compassionate, who took it upon himself to protect Emma's interests. He stood by her through the legal battles, reclaiming much of what her uncles had tried to steal. Emma, he once told her during a late-night meeting in his office, "Your father would want you to protect what he worked so hard to build. Guard it with your life, and be cautious of those who only see you as a means to an end." The words stayed with her, but they also terrified her. Emma knew she was unprepared for the weight of responsibility that had been thrust upon her. At just 23, she had inherited a fortune, yet she felt more vulnerable than ever. To make matters worse, suitors began appearing at her doorstep, men eager to marry her not for love, but for the wealth and power she represented. Emma's heart hardened with each disingenuous smile, each false profession of affection. One evening, after yet another exhausting day of deflecting advances and dealing with greedy relatives, Emma sat alone in her expansive but empty apartment. She stared out the window at the city skyline, a glimmering facade of opportunity and ambition. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized how disconnected she felt from the world around her. She yearned for a simpler life, one where she could find genuine connections and discover who she truly was without the shadow of her parents' legacy. The next morning, with resolve burning in her chest, Emma made a decision. She would leave New York, leave the memories, the wealth, the scheming uncles, and the pretentious suitors behind. She needed to start fresh, to find herself in a place where no one knew her name or her story. Emma handed over the management of her family's assets to trusted employees. packed a small suitcase, and boarded a train to a city where she could blend into the crowd. Los Angeles was her destination, a place of reinvention and anonymity. She found a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the grandeur of her former life. Dressed in simple clothes, with no trace of her affluent past, Emma became just another face in the bustling city. For the first time in her life, she felt invisible. And strangely, it was a relief. But starting over was not as easy as she had imagined. The days were long and uncertain, as Emma wandered the city in search of work. Without her degree still unfinished due to her parents' untimely death, finding a job proved difficult. Her savings, though modest compared to her fortune, were dwindling. She knew she had to accept whatever work came her way, even if it was far from the future she once envisioned. One morning, after yet another fruitless job search, Emma stumbled into a sprawling market. The air was alive with the scent of freshly baked bread, the chatter of vendors, and the vibrant colors of produce and flowers. As she wandered the crowded aisles, something caught her eye: a small shop selling wines, both local and international. The sign above the door read Morgan Cellars. Intrigued, Emma stepped inside. Behind the counter stood James Morgan, a young man with an easy smile and a confident demeanor. His hands moved deftly as he unpacked a shipment of wine bottles, his sharp eyes scanning each label. Emma introduced herself hesitantly, explaining her search for work. James studied her for a moment, then gestured to the register. "Can you start today?" he asked. Emma's heart lifted. It wasn't the job she had dreamed of, but it was a beginning. Little did she know, stepping into Morgan Cellars that day would set her on a path that would challenge her resilience, test her heart, and ultimately redefine her life. Emma's first day at Morgan Cellars was a whirlwind. The shop was a cozy, bustling space filled with shelves of meticulously arranged wine bottles. Each label told a story, a blend of artistry and craftsmanship that intrigued her. Customers came and went, some hurried and others taking their time to savor the offerings. Emma, in her simple attire, blended in seamlessly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she was just another person earning an honest living. James Morgan, her new boss, was a charismatic and driven man. At 28, he had taken over the family business after graduating from college. He had transformed Morgan Cellars into a thriving operation, importing rare wines from around the globe while maintaining a strong local presence. Despite his confident exterior, James treated his employees with respect, and Emma quickly noticed his knack for connecting with customers. His enthusiasm for the craft was contagious. Emma threw herself into the work, eager to prove her worth. She found the rhythm of the shop oddly comforting, stocking shelves, assisting customers, and handling transactions. Her natural charm and warmth quickly drew attention. Customers began to comment on her friendliness, many returning not just for the wine but for the cheerful conversations she offered. Even James couldn't help but notice her way with people. "Emma," he said one afternoon, leaning against the counter with a curious smile, "you've only been here a few days, and already customers are asking for you by name. What's your secret?" Emma shrugged, a modest smile gracing her lips. "I just like talking to people," she replied, "and listening. Sometimes, that's all someone needs, a little kindness." James nodded thoughtfully, impressed by her sincerity. As the days turned into weeks, Emma and James began to build a rapport. They often stayed late after closing, sharing stories about their lives. Emma, careful not to reveal too much about her past, kept her answers vague, focusing instead on her fascination with the wine business. James, on the other hand, opened up about the challenges of running the shop and the expectations placed on him by his family. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, were a powerful presence in his life. They had built their wealth through generations of hard work and held traditional views about family and marriage. James often spoke of their high expectations, particularly his mother's desire for him to marry someone from a similarly privileged background. She already has someone in mind, he confided one evening, shaking his head. Jessica. A family friend. She's everything my mother thinks I should want. But, Emma prompted, curious despite herself. James hesitated, his gaze fixed on a wine bottle he was turning in his hands. But I don't want someone just because they check the right boxes. I want something real. Emma felt a pang in her chest at his words. She knew all too well the suffocating weight of expectations, the pressure to fit into a mold created by others. She had run from it herself, only to find that life had a way of presenting new challenges, no matter where you went. As weeks passed, Emma's role at Morgan Cellars began to evolve. James started seeking her input on business decisions, from which wines to stock to how to arrange the displays. Her keen insights surprised him, and he found himself drawn not just to her ideas but to the quiet confidence with which she shared them. Emma, too, felt a growing connection. Though she kept her emotions in check, she had learned the hard way to guard her heart. But not everyone was pleased with Emma's growing presence. The other employees, particularly the women, began to whisper behind her back. They noticed the way James looked at her, the way his smile seemed brighter when she was around. And then there were the customers, those who had hoped for James's attention and now watched with envy as he leaned a little too close when speaking to Emma. His tone just a little too soft. Emma tried to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on her work. She reminded herself why she had come to this city in the first place, to start fresh, to find herself, to escape the shadows of her past. But as James's interest in her grew, so did her unease. She had spent so long building walls around her heart that the idea of letting someone in again felt terrifying. One evening, as they closed up the shop, James lingered by the door, his gaze fixed on Emma as she counted the cash register. Emma, he began, his voice hesitant. She looked up, startled by the seriousness in his tone. Yes. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're here, he said, his words hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Emma offered him a small smile, unsure of how to respond. Thank you, James. That means a lot. As he locked the door behind her and watched her walk away into the night, James couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was more than just an employee. She was a mystery, one he found himself increasingly eager to unravel. Little did they know, their connection was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have anticipated. As the months went by, Emma's life in Los Angeles began to feel more settled. She had created a small routine, work at Morgan Cellars during the day and retreat to her modest apartment at night. The simplicity was refreshing, a stark contrast to the opulence of her past life. Yet, even in her newfound anonymity, she couldn't shake the lingering awareness of her hidden identity. She knew it was only a matter of time before her past would catch up with her. But for now, she was content to live in the moment. James, however, was becoming an increasingly prominent figure in her life. His charm, wit, and passion for his work made him hard to ignore. He often sought her company, not just during work hours but in moments that extended beyond their professional dynamic. Emma found herself enjoying their conversations, his humor a balm to her still healing heart. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the shop, James invited Emma to join him for dinner at a small Italian restaurant down the street. It was a casual invitation, but Emma hesitated. She knew the risks of allowing herself to grow closer to him, but she also knew how difficult it was to find genuine connections. I could use some company, James said with an easy smile, and I promise the lasagna here is worth it. Emma chuckled, unable to resist his disarming charm. All right, she replied, but if it's not the best lasagna I've ever had, I'm holding you accountable. The restaurant was warm and inviting, its rustic decor and dim lighting creating an intimate atmosphere. They sat at a corner table, and as the evening wore on, Emma found herself relaxing in James's presence. He shared stories of his childhood, his struggles to take over the family business, and his dreams for the future. Emma listened intently, her guard lowering with each passing moment. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," James said suddenly, his eyes locked on hers. "There's something about you, Emma. You're different." Emma felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of embarrassment and apprehension. She forced a smile, deflecting his compliment with a light-hearted laugh. "I'm just a girl trying to figure things out," she said. "Nothing special." James shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "You're wrong. You are special. And I don't think you even realize it." The intensity of his words left Emma speechless. For a moment, she felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her, the truth of who she was and what she was running from. She wanted to tell him, to share the burden she carried. But fear held her back. Instead, she changed the subject, steering the conversation toward safer territory. As they walked back to the shop later that evening, James's hand brushed against hers. Emma tensed but didn't pull away. She could feel the unspoken tension between them, a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. When they reached the door, James hesitated, turning to face her. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. "It's been a long time since I've had this much fun." Emma smiled, her heart aching with the weight of her emotions. "Me too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. James stepped closer, his hand lingering near hers as though he wanted to take it but didn't dare. "Good night, Emma," he said, his voice filled with unspoken meaning. "Good night, James," she replied, quickly turning and walking away before she could say or do something she might regret. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she replayed the evening in her mind. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward James, but she also couldn't ignore the voice in her head reminding her of why she had come to this city in the first place. She had to protect herself, to stay focused on the life she was trying to build. Anything more was a risk she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Meanwhile, James was equally conflicted. He had always been confident in his decisions. But Emma was different. She wasn't just another employee or another face in the crowd. She was a mystery, one he was desperate to solve. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling him. Their connection grew stronger with each passing day. And with it came the inevitable questions. Could Emma trust James with her secret? Could James win the heart of a woman who had spent so long guarding it? And what would happen when the truth finally came to light? The answers to these questions loomed over them, a shadow that neither could ignore. But for now, they clung to the fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this connection could lead to something real. The connection between Emma and James grew in unspoken ways. Their shared moments at the shop became the highlight of their days, filled with laughter, stolen glances, and a camaraderie that felt effortless. Emma's initial hesitation began to soften, though a small voice inside her reminded her to stay cautious. She had learned to protect her heart after everything she had been through. But James made it increasingly difficult to keep her walls intact. One afternoon, as they restocked shelves together, James turned to Emma with a curious expression. "You never talk much about your past," he said casually, though his eyes betrayed his deeper curiosity. "Where you're from, your family. I guess I've just been wondering about it." Emma paused, the wine bottle in her hands trembling slightly. She had always been careful to reveal as little as possible, crafting her responses with just enough detail to seem truthful while avoiding her real story. "There's not much to tell," she said, forcing a smile. "I moved around a lot growing up. My parents passed away a few years ago, and I guess I've just been figuring things out since." James frowned, his expression softening. "I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't mean to pry." "It's okay," Emma replied quickly, her voice gentle. "I've made peace with it. But honestly, I prefer focusing on the present." James nodded, sensing her discomfort and letting the subject drop. But the interaction left him more intrigued than ever. Emma was like a book with missing pages, and he couldn't resist the urge to fill in the blanks. That evening, Emma stayed late to close up the shop. She found herself lost in thought, replaying James's questions in her mind. She couldn't deny the feelings she had for him, but the idea of letting him into her world terrified her. What if he saw her differently? What if he didn't understand why she had hidden so much from him? As she locked the door and stepped out into the cool evening air, she found James waiting for her. He leaned casually against the wall, his hands in his pockets and a small, sheepish smile on his face. "I thought I'd walk you home," he said, his tone light but warm. Emma hesitated but nodded, her heart fluttering at the unexpected gesture. They walked in comfortable silence at first, the quiet hum of the city surrounding them. It wasn't until they reached her street that James spoke again. "Emma," he began, his voice hesitant. "I know I might be overstepping, but I care about you. More than just as a friend or an employee. I know I don't know everything about you, but I want to. I want to be someone you can trust." Emma stopped in her tracks, his words catching her off guard. She turned to face him, her chest tightening with emotion. "James, she started but faltered, unsure of what to say. He stepped closer, his gaze searching hers. "I'm not asking for anything more than you're ready to give," he said softly. "I just needed you to know how I feel." Emma looked away, her mind racing. She wanted to trust him, to let him in. But the fear of what might happen if she did was overwhelming. "I appreciate that," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there are things about me, things I'm not ready to share." James nodded, his expression understanding but tinged with disappointment. "I get it," he said. "And I'll wait. For as long as it takes." Emma's heart ached at his words, the sincerity in his voice cutting through her defenses. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his feelings were genuine. But the shadow of her past loomed too large, and she wasn't sure if she could bear the risk of letting it come between them. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Emma couldn't shake the thought of James's words. For the first time in a long time, she felt the faint stirrings of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to open her heart again. But as much as she wanted to believe in that possibility, she knew there was still so much left unsaid. Meanwhile, James wrestled with his own thoughts. He had put his feelings on the line, and while Emma hadn't rejected him outright, her guarded response left him uncertain. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, but he also knew that trust had to be earned. If Emma needed time, he was willing to give it to her. As their paths converged and diverged in equal measure, both Emma and James found themselves standing at the edge of something profound, something that had the potential to change their lives forever. But the question remained, were they ready to take the leap? The days following James's confession were marked by a palpable tension between him and Emma. It wasn't the kind of tension born from conflict, but rather the unspoken weight of emotions lingering just beneath the surface. At the shop, they maintained a sense of professionalism, though their stolen glances and subtle smiles hinted at the deeper connection growing between them. Emma found herself thinking about James more often than she cared to admit. His words replayed in her mind during quiet moments, how he had promised to wait, to give her time. It was a kindness she hadn't expected, one that both warmed her heart and unsettled her. She had spent so long running from her past, cloaking herself in anonymity, that the idea of someone truly knowing her felt both liberating and terrifying. One morning, as she stood behind the counter arranging the new stock, James approached her with a hesitant smile. "We're hosting a wine tasting event this weekend," he said, holding up a flyer. "I was wondering if you'd help me run it." Emma glanced at the flyer, then back at James. "A wine tasting? That sounds fancy." James chuckled, the sound light and genuine. "It's not as fancy as it sounds. Just a chance for us to showcase some of our best selections and meet potential new clients. You'd be great at it." Emma hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter. Are you sure? I'm not exactly an expert. You don't have to be, James replied. Your charm and way with people are all you need. Trust me. His confidence in her was disarming. And despite her reservations, Emma found herself agreeing. All right, she said with a small smile. I'll help. When the evening of the event arrived, Emma felt a mix of excitement and nerves. She wore a simple but elegant dress James had picked out for her, one that made her feel both confident and out of place. As she stepped into the shop, transformed for the night with soft lighting and carefully arranged displays, she caught James's eye. His smile widened as he approached her. You look amazing, he said softly, his gaze lingering for a moment too long. Emma felt her cheeks flush. Thank you, she murmured, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. This place looks incredible. Not as incredible as you, James replied, his voice warm and sincere. Before Emma could respond, a group of guests entered, and the evening began. Emma quickly found her stride, greeting guests with a natural ease and guiding them through the wine selections. She surprised herself with how much she had learned about the business in her time at Morgan Cellars. And James watched her with a mixture of pride and admiration. She was captivating, and it was clear that the guests were as charmed by her as he was. As the evening wound down and the last guests filtered out, Emma and James found themselves alone in the shop, tidying up the remnants of the event. The soft glow of the lights cast a warm hue over the space, and the air between them felt charged. You were incredible tonight, James said, breaking the silence. I don't know how I ever managed these events without you. Emma laughed softly, her nerves finally easing. I think you're exaggerating. I'm not, James insisted, stepping closer. You have this way of making people feel at ease. It's rare. Emma met his gaze, her heart pounding. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet vulnerability he rarely let show. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to let her guard down completely, to let him in. But as quickly as the thought came, so did the fear. James, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want to lead you on. You've been so kind to me, and I care about you. But there's so much about me you don't know. Then tell me, James said gently, his voice steady. Whatever it is, I can handle it. Emma looked away, her chest tightening. It's not that simple, Emma, James said, taking her hand in his. I don't care about your past. All I care about is who you are now. And I know that person is worth waiting for. Emma's breath hitched, the weight of his words pressing against her carefully constructed walls. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he meant what he said. But the fear of what might happen if she let him in was still too great. I need time, she whispered, her voice barely audible. James nodded, releasing her hand but not his resolve. Take all the time you need, he said softly. I'll be here. As Emma left the shop that night, her emotions churned like a storm. She knew she was standing on the edge of something profound, something that could change her life forever. But taking that step would mean facing her fears, and that was a leap she wasn't sure she was ready to make. The weeks following the wine-tasting event were filled with a blend of normalcy and undercurrents of unresolved tension. Emma and James continued to work together seamlessly, their interactions laced with warmth and camaraderie. Yet, the words they had shared lingered in the air between them, unspoken but undeniably present. For Emma, it was a delicate balancing act, navigating her growing feelings for James while keeping her carefully guarded secret intact. James, for his part, respected Emma's request for time. He kept their conversations light, though his quiet longing for more occasionally slipped through in the way his gaze lingered on her or how he found excuses to be near her. Emma noticed, and while it made her heart ache with guilt and yearning, it also deepened her fear of what would happen if the truth about her identity came to light. One crisp autumn morning, Emma arrived at the shop to find James poring over a stack of papers at the counter. He looked up as she entered, offering her a smile that was both welcoming and weary. Morning, he said, pushing the papers aside. How are you? Good. Emma replied, setting her bag down. You look like you didn't get much sleep. James laughed softly, running a hand through his hair. Yeah. I've been trying to finalize some plans for the shop. Expanding our inventory. Maybe even opening a second location. It's exciting. But a little overwhelming. Emma tilted her head, impressed by his ambition. That sounds amazing. I had no idea you were thinking that big. I guess I haven't really talked about it much, James admitted, his tone turning more serious. But the truth is, I've been feeling a lot of pressure lately. My family, they expect so much from me. Sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough. Emma's chest tightened at his words, recognizing the weight of those expectations all too well. She hesitated before speaking, her voice soft. I know what that's like. To feel like you're constantly trying to prove yourself, even when it seems impossible. James studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly. You really do understand, don't you? Emma nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. More than you know. Before James could respond, the door jingled as a customer entered, and the moment was lost. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but James's words stayed with Emma. She couldn't help but feel a growing sense of kinship with him, a shared understanding that made her want to let him in. But the fear of what might happen if she did still loomed large. That evening, as Emma walked home, her thoughts swirled with doubt and indecision. She was tired of running, tired of hiding, but the idea of revealing her true self felt like stepping into uncharted territory. What if James saw her differently? What if he judged her for the life she had left behind? The following weekend, James invited Emma to join him for a walk in the park. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of orange and gold, and the crisp air was filled with the scent of autumn. As they strolled along the winding paths, James seemed unusually quiet, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. Finally, he stopped beneath a large oak tree, turning to face her. Emma, he said, his voice steady but tinged with hesitation. I know you said you need time, and I've tried to give you that. But I need to know, do you think there's a chance for us? For something more? Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she met his gaze. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope he was barely daring to hold on to. And for the first time, she felt a spark of courage rise within her. There is, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But James, there's something you need to know. Something I've been keeping from you. James's expression shifted, a mix of curiosity and concern. What is it? Emma took a deep breath, the words she had kept buried for so long finally rising to the surface. I'm not who you think I am. My name. My past. There's so much I haven't told you. And before we go any further, you deserve to know the truth. James stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. Emma, whatever it is, we'll face it together. Just tell me. Her chest tightened as she prepared to reveal the secret that had haunted her since she arrived in Los Angeles. For better or worse, it was time to stop running. And as she began to speak, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, James would understand. In the end, Emma's courage to reveal her true identity marked the turning point of her life. She confessed everything to James, the wealth she had inherited, the tragedies she had endured, and the reason she had hidden her past. To her surprise, James didn't flinch. Instead, he embraced her honesty, assuring her that his feelings were rooted in the person she had become, not the life she had left behind. Together, they confronted the obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. James stood by Emma as she reclaimed her confidence and her role in shaping her future. Their love, built on trust and mutual respect, blossomed into something neither of them had ever imagined. They learned that true partnership comes from accepting each other's flaws and strengths, creating a foundation of support and unwavering care. Emma's journey taught her that running from her past wasn't the answer, it was learning to embrace it as part of who she was. And with James by her side, she felt ready to face anything the future held. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience and love. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.